Today on Cosmic Disclosure, we're with Richard Doty, a retired special agent who served in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Richard was intimately involved with UFO, ET-related intelligence. Today, we are discussing your work at the Institute for Advanced Studies and other relationships. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Emery. It's good to be here.
Well, you worked at the Institute of Advanced Studies back in 1994, correct?
Yes.
And what kind of work were you doing there?
Well, I met Dr. Hal Puthoff, who was the director of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin, at a seminar. And he knew of me before because of Kit Green, who I'd worked with in the intelligence community. Kit introduced me to Hal.
Big names there.
Yes. And so Hal asked me to work for him. And so I decided in 1994 that I would go to work on a part-time basis at first with Dr. Puthoff. Well,
Dr. Hal Puthoff was involved with many, of course, high-level programs and UAP phenomena. Is there anything you could tell us about that, and what was your role in that?
Well, Dr. Puthoff had the institute down there. He was intimately involved with DARPA projects and other projects, primarily dealing with energy. He had a theory that energy devices, both ET and maybe ours in the future, could operate in what he called zero-point energy. And so he was involved in that. He asked me to be a field investigator, to go out and collect data that he needed to advance his research in his laboratories. He also asked me to interface with U.S. intelligence agencies and other agencies within the United States government, and I agreed to do that.
Rick, what three-letter agencies did you actually work with as a liaison?
Well, I interfaced with the Central Intelligence Agency, both current employees and past employees, and I'm going to talk about that. My first project involved interfacing with one of the former directors of the Central Intelligence Agency. Also interfaced with DIA. I had contacts within the DIA. And then there were people that Dr. Puthoff knew within these agencies, CIA, DIA, and DARPA, that Hal introduced me to. So I had contacts within those different agencies and also within DARPA. So I maintained contacts and learned of and was introduced to new contacts with these intelligence agencies, trying to obtain information that they could share with me that would help Dr. Puthoff in his research.
And who was the director of the CIA at that time?
In 1994, it was under the Clinton administration, but I didn't have contact with that particular person.
Okay.
My first project was to make contact and get information from Richard Helms, who was a former director of Central Intelligence Agency some years ago. The first time I met Richard Helms was at an aviary meeting. And I think I mentioned on one of the Cosmic Disclosures episodes, it was about 1980. He came into the meeting. He wasn't director of the Central Intelligence Agency anymore, but once you're connected with the intelligence community, you're always connected, especially if you were the director. I met him. I became friends with him. He just seemed to take me under his wing. He shared a lot of information with me back then. So I called him up and made contact with Richard Helms. And over the period of several months, he introduced me to some other people. But he shared a lot of information with me regarding the Central Intelligence Agency's role within the investigation and categorization of information regarding ETs and UFOs.
What did Mr. Helms tell you about the ETs and UFOs?
In 1959, while he was a young intelligence officer, Richard Helms was introduced to the subject of UFOs. There was an incident on his watch. He was a station chief that involved extraterrestrial contact, and then he was briefed in to the program. And his briefing is almost similar to my briefing. The first part of the briefing involved the first contacts that we had with an extraterrestrial race, and that was a Roswell incident. He told me all about how he was briefed into the Roswell incident and into the crash sites at Corona and Magdalena, and same information that I had been briefed into. And then, of course, he went in more details about what the CIA role was in and collecting it. And the CIA's role was more foreign collection than domestic collection. And then he talked about other contacts with extraterrestrials that the CIA was involved with, and most of them were overseas. He talked about an incident that occurred in Norway, northern Norway. There's a NATO base up there, and there was a contact there that he told me about. And I believe that was in 1956 or 57 that the CIA became involved with. Their case officers went out and contacted the people that observed this landing up in northern Norway. And back in those days, there was always a threat that a UFO was something of a Soviet aircraft, maybe a new design or an experimental craft that the Soviets were flying. And so at that time period, the CIA was relatively new then because they came into existence in 1947. So there were new people on the block, so to speak, and they were trying to gather as much intelligence as they could during those days, especially regarding the threat of extraterrestrial contact, or what then in the early days most of the CIA scientists thought were possibly Soviet spacecrafts. And so he briefed me on many other different incidents that happened, some inside the Soviet Union, some inside Eastern Bloc countries, some inside China, information that was gathered by the Central Intelligence Agency.
In what way, then, did the CIA and the Institute of Advanced Studies, what was that connection then? What was their main role?
Well, there was a lot of things that Dr. Putoff was doing that I wasn't aware of and I wasn't briefed into, and he was interfacing with a lot of different agencies regarding technology and research. And it was my job to go out and interface and try to get contacts within these different agencies. Like he wanted me to interface with a certain other person within the CIA who was currently in the CIA, that I can't mention his name, but because that person was a field operative who had a lot of information about technology, and that's primarily what Dr. Putoff wanted, was technology, or information about technology or advanced research or that the CIA might be doing. I mean, he didn't want me to go out and try to spy on the CIA or anything like this. Everything that I wanted to do would have to be agreeable to the person that I was making contact with.
While Putoff was getting all this information from all these agencies, all these events, what was he doing with that information? Where did it go to from there?
That's a good question. I wasn't privy to that. I believe it was Dr. Putoff was working hand to hand with DARPA.
Right.
So DARPA had a special section that dealt with exotic technology, and they didn't name it UFOs or ET. It was exotic technologies. And they had companies. Now, DARPA, which I'm going to talk about later, but DARPA was an agency that controlled advanced research and development. And they wanted other places, because they didn't have the scientists, but they wanted other companies, other entities within the research community to look at what they have and give them the ideas on what or how this research could be developed or understood. And so that's where Dr. Putoff's institute came in. So and I'm not really sure how that all interfaced. I mean, wasn't briefed into everything that Dr. Putoff was doing, and I'm sure there was a place where he sent his information, his research, but a lot of it remained there at the laboratory. He was trying to reverse engineer things at the institute too.
Is it possible that Hal Putoff would receive, devices, parts of craft or whatever it was, and then it was up to maybe him to say, we keep this and study this. Maybe this needs to go to DARPA. This needs to go to Raytheon, other corporations.
Yeah, he probably did, but there's a lot of proprietary information, and I can't really share because I was briefed in. So, yeah, in some respects that's true, but most of what he was getting was he was contracted to do certain things. Well, he wasn't doing anything outside the realms of his own work. I mean, he wasn't a maverick, so to speak. He had contracts and so forth with companies way beyond my knowledge of it.
What did Mr. Helms talk to you about with, the reverse engineering of ET craft, of, different ET tools?
Well, he had a lot of information about what the CIA knew then. And of course, this is back in the 60s and 70s. They certainly had, he called them trinkets. He said, we obtained trinkets. That was his famous term. He would always use the word trinkets. And and then I learned, the more I got to know him, that the trinkets meant coming from the ETs. And the CIA had contacts that weren't shared with other agencies. And they obtained information and trinkets where they didn't share with other agencies. And I was hoping that he would open up with me and tell me what these trinkets were.
Right. Elaborate a little bit, what does trinket mean?
Exactly. But, there's things that he wouldn't or couldn't say.
Of course.
And I'm not really sure what those trinkets were or what they were used for. But one interesting thing about Richard Helms is, and I mentioned this before in an episode, he was the original Falcon in the aviary. And so he was only known by a few people within the aviary. And Dr. Hal Puthoff was a member of the aviary, and he was aware of Richard Helms's position within the aviary and how the aviary fit into Dr. Puthoff's laboratory.
Is it possible to say that captive extraterrestrials fall into trinkets?
I took that some of the references to the trinkets used by Richard Helms meant captured ETs, not anything that was here as a gift, but because he mentioned many times that hostilities were always prevalent when an ET contact was made. He didn't elaborate, but I took it to mean that there were incidents where we captured, and this is me saying this isn't him saying it, but I took it to mean that there were incidents that either the CIA or some military entity captured an ET, and then somehow the CIA got custody of it.
Now, do we have craft that can fly off planet using these reverse engineered technologies?
I can't officially say that my past experience or past work where I saw one or had access to it, but my unofficial beliefs is that yes, we do. We do have crafts that can fly with either antimatter or some other exotic, and I don't know what it is, but some exotic ET reverse technology. I saw a craft fly when I was at Area 51. This wasn't a conventional craft. It was able to do things that a F-117 or a F-35 or a F-22 or a U-2 or any other plane that we had in our arsenal could do. And although no one actually told me, I mean, I could put two to two together and figure that that had to be reverse engineered, because what I was told is that was one of ours. And I said, well, what system is it using? He said, we got it from a friend. And that's it. So, I mean, putting two together, yeah, we did. I saw something fly that I couldn't understand. And, you know, Bob Lazar talked about things. And I believe, you know, obviously I was at S2. He calls it S4. S4 is the underground facility. S2 is the whole complex. I mean, it's just a difference in of how you name it. But when he talked to me and told me what he did, and that's exactly how you got into the facility, I knew he had been there.
Did you have other colleagues that collaborate, you know, with your opinion on this that you have spoke to?
Many, including scientists and including personnel at the Institute that had knowledge above mine and the technical knowledge and technical experience that I didn't have, that told me, yeah, we have crafts that can do things like that.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Emery.